For every loved WWE gimmick that became iconic, there's one disaster that almost ruined the wrestler's career. Kicking off our list with one of the most entertaining gimmicks of 2016. By 2016, Chris Jericho was already a multiple-time world champion with decades of success behind him. He could have easily coasted on his legacy, but instead, he grabbed a clipboard and changed everything. The list of Jericho gimmick was simple, and that's what made it so fun. Every time someone annoyed Jericho, wronged him, or simply existed in a way he didn't appreciate, their name went on the list. That's it. That was the whole gimmick. But Jericho's commitment to the bit transformed it into something magical. Kevin Owens and Jericho's friendship, built partially around this gimmick, became one of the most entertaining partnerships in modern WWE. The Festival of Friendship segment remains a masterclass in storytelling, and the list was right there at the center of all the drama. Jericho proved that you don't need elaborate costumes or supernatural powers to get over. Sometimes all you need is a simple idea and the charisma to make people believe in it. But in stark contrast to Jericho's career renaissance, Cody Rhodes got handed a gimmick so terrible it literally drove him out of WWE. In 2014, after years of being a solid mid-card performer, Cody Rhodes was told he'd be transforming into Stardust, essentially a knockoff version of his brother Goldust's character. But the moment the face paint went on, Cody's soul visibly left his body. The character was supposed to be cosmic and mysterious, but it just came across as a guy doing a bad Goldust impression. WWE tried to position it as something special, but fans could see right through it. This wasn't a creative reinvention. This was creative punishment. But the real tragedy was watching Cody desperately try to make it work. He committed to the character completely, cutting promos in that weird voice and doing the bizarre movements. But no amount of talent could save a concept that was fundamentally broken. When Cody reportedly asked to drop the character and go back to being himself, WWE refused. They kept him trapped in the gimmick, watching his potential waste away beneath layers of face paint nobody wanted to see. The Stardust era became so notorious that when Cody left WWE and found massive success in the independent scene before co-founding AEW, people specifically cited this gimmick as an example of WWE misusing talent. It's rare that a single character decision contributes to the creation of a rival wrestling company, but Stardust was just that bad. But moving on from Stardust's disaster, let's talk about the time when John Cena went from just another generic wrestler to WWE's most beloved rapper. Before John Cena became the polarizing superhero who refused to give up, he was a rapper from West Newbury who spit bars about his opponents. The Doctor of Thuganomics gimmick, introduced in 2002, was lightning in a bottle at exactly the right moment. WWE was transitioning out of the Attitude Era, desperately searching for new stars who could carry the company forward. Cena had been floundering as a generic babyface until a Halloween episode of SmackDown where he dressed as Vanilla Ice and started freestyling. Within weeks, Cena was cutting rap promos that had the crowd completely invested. His entrance featured him throwing up hand signs, wearing a chain with a padlock, and arriving in throwback jerseys. It was the perfect intersection of early 2000s hip-hop culture and pro wrestling. The character felt authentic because Cena clearly loved doing it, and his natural charisma shined through every rhyme. To this day, whenever Cena brings back elements of the rapper persona, crowds lose their minds. That's the mark of a truly great gimmick, one that remains beloved decades after its retirement. But speaking of gimmicks that should have stayed retired, let's talk about the time WWE put a mask on Hulk Hogan and thought it was the coolest thing ever. In 2003, during a storyline where Vince McMahon had fired Hulk Hogan, WWE decided the best course of action was to bring Hogan back as a completely different person. That person was Mr. America, a masked patriot who definitely wasn't Hulk Hogan, despite having Hogan's body, Hogan's voice, Hogan's mustache, and even his mannerisms. Vince McMahon would demand Mr. America remove his mask to prove he was Hogan, and Mr. America would find a way out every single time. The gimmick lasted only a few months before mercifully being dropped, with Hogan eventually just becoming himself again. Some ideas sound fun on paper, but Mr. America proved that Hulk Hogan in a mask was not one of them. However, if you want to talk about a gimmick that didn't just succeed but literally changed the entire wrestling industry, look no further than The Rock. When Rocky debuted in 1996 as a smiling, wholesome babyface with a terrible haircut, fans absolutely hated him. WWE had tried to force-feed audiences a third-generation star, and the crowd started gagging all over it. But then, in 1997, everything changed. Rocky turned heel, joined the Nation of Domination, and transformed into The Rock. Suddenly, this guy who couldn't get cheered to save his life became the most electrifying man in sports entertainment. The Rock spoke in third person, raised his eyebrow, and delivered promos with catchphrases that became a part of mainstream media. Whether he was the arrogant corporate champion or the people's champion fighting for the fans, The Rock made it work because the character was just an amplified version of Dwayne Johnson's natural personality. Every wrestler who's tried to replicate his promo style has failed because there's only one Rock, and his gimmick remains the blueprint for how to get over in professional wrestling. However, The Rock wasn't the only member of his bloodline who underwent a massive character transformation. Roman Reigns spent years being rejected by WWE fans despite the company's desperate attempts to make him their next top babyface. But then, in 2020, Roman returned from hiatus with Paul Heyman by his side and a completely different attitude. The Tribal Chief was born, and suddenly, Roman Reigns became the top guy WWE had always wanted him to be. Roman carried himself like wrestling royalty because, as he constantly reminded everyone, he was the head of the table in a legendary wrestling family. Roman wasn't a generic monster heel. He was a manipulative family patriarch who used psychological warfare as much as physical dominance. The numbers speak for themselves. Roman's title reign lasted over 1,300 days, and during that time, he elevated everyone he worked with, from Kevin Owens to Sami Zayn to Cody Rhodes. The Tribal Chief proved that sometimes the best gimmick is letting a talented performer embrace who they actually are, just turned up to 11. After celebrating one of the greatest character transformations in wrestling history, let's talk about one of the biggest disasters. In 2012, WWE spent weeks airing vignettes hyping the debut of Brous Clay. The promos were dark and menacing, promising a destructive monster who would demolish everyone in his path. Fans were intrigued, but then Brous finally debuted, and instead of a monster, they got a dancing dinosaur in a tracksuit. The Funkasaurus was supposed to be fun. The crowd initially reacted positively out of pure shock, but the novelty wore off fast. Within months, the dancing dinosaur gimmick had completely run its course. What made the Funkasaurus particularly frustrating was the wasted potential. Brous Clay was an imposing performer who'd been impressive in NXT as a serious monster heel, and even as Alberto Del Rio's bodyguard. He had the size, the look, and the intensity to be a credible threat. Instead, WWE turned him into comic relief that stopped being funny almost immediately. Fans wanted a monster. Instead, they got a meme that wasn't even funny enough to last a full year. But if you think the Funkasaurus was a waste of potential, let me tell you about the time WWE tried to convince everyone that Albert had somehow become a Japanese wrestling legend. In 2012, vignettes aired showing a mysterious masked warrior dominating opponents in Japan. WWE hyped this debut like it was the second coming of Brock Lesnar. Then, the mask came off, and anyone with functioning eyeballs immediately recognized the guy underneath. Lord Tensai was supposed to be intimidating, but fans weren't buying it for a second. Chants of Albert filled the arenas, completely destroying any mystique WWE tried to create. It didn't matter that the real-life Matthew Bloom had actually been successful in Japan as Giant Bernard. To WWE fans, he was Albert, and no amount of face paint was going to change that. Within months, WWE quietly dropped the Japanese Monster Act, and Tensai started teaming with Brous Clay in another dancing gimmick called Tons of Funk, which was somehow even worse. But moving on from these disasters, let's talk about the one gimmick that perfectly captures the magic of professional wrestling. When Mark Calloway debuted at Survivor Series 1990 as a zombie mortician who felt no pain and was managed by a funeral director, every logical part of your brain should have rejected it immediately. But instead, somehow, it became the most iconic character in wrestling history. The Undertaker succeeded because WWE committed completely to the insanity of the concept. This wasn't a guy playing dress-up. This was a supernatural entity who sat up after taking finishers, rolled his eyes back into his head, and summoned lightning to the arena. Undertaker moved in slow motion, spoke in cryptic words, and made grown men terrified of being trapped in a casket. The presentation was so over the top that it somehow became genuinely intimidating. His WrestleMania streak became wrestling's most protected accomplishment, with 21 consecutive victories that turned every match into an event of its own. From 1990 to 2020, Taker remained relevant through multiple generations of wrestling fans. Children who were terrified of him in the 90s brought their own children to see him decades later. In an industry where gimmicks have a shelf life measured in months, The Undertaker lasted 30 years and became one of the most respected figures in wrestling history. In stark contrast to that masterpiece of character work, let's discuss the time WWE decided to turn Taker's brother into an evil dentist. In 1995, during one of the company's creative low points, Glenn Jacobs was introduced as Isaac Yankham, a deranged dentist hired by Jerry Lawler to torture Bret Hart. He wore a dentist's outfit to the ring, carried dental tools as weapons, and his whole character was built around the premise that people are scared of going to the dentist. The problem was that nobody feared Isaac Yankham. They just felt embarrassed for Glenn Jacobs, who was clearly talented but stuck playing a character that belonged in a rejected Saturday morning cartoon. Fans didn't take Yankham seriously as a threat, and matches featuring him felt like they were happening in a completely different, much dumber universe than the rest of the WWE. Within a year, Isaac Yankham disappeared from WWE television. But little did anyone know that this same performer would soon be repackaged into one of the greatest characters of all time. After the Isaac Yankham disaster, Glenn Jacobs was repackaged as Fake Diesel, which was somehow even worse. But then, in 1997, everything changed. Paul Bearer revealed that The Undertaker had a brother, one who'd supposedly died in a fire accident years earlier. Kane emerged through Hellfire at Bad Blood, and wrestling was never the same. Where Yankham was goofy, Kane was genuinely terrifying. Kane didn't speak, he couldn't feel pain, and was presented as an unstoppable force of destruction motivated by revenge against his brother. This was a horror movie villain brought to life in wrestling form. He started as The Undertaker's monstrous brother, became a comedic character during the Attitude Era with his partnership with X-Pac, transformed into an unmasked monster during the Ruthless Aggression Era, and eventually became a corporate demon with the Authority. Through every iteration, Kane stayed relevant because Glenn Jacobs understood the assignment and made each version work. He proved that with the right gimmick and the right performer, you can go from evil dentist to Hall of Fame legend. But after celebrating that perfect example of character resurrection, we need to talk about 5 wrestlers whose gimmicks were completely dead on arrival. In 2020, WWE introduced a group of masked invaders who were supposedly anarchists trying to destroy the company from within. What followed was a masterclass in how to kill 5 careers simultaneously. Everything about Retribution was fundamentally broken. They were supposed to be dangerous outsiders, but they were obviously WWE wrestlers wearing gear that made them look like rejected cartoon villains. Their masks were ridiculous, their names were somehow worse. And while WWE wanted them to be the NWO, they came across like the Power Rangers' least intimidating villains. Retribution lasted less than a year before being quietly disbanded, with most members released from WWE shortly after. But speaking of factions that didn't work out, check out this video about the most loved versus most hated WWE factions.